Cap, take it away.
Hello, good day, everybody. It's a cool day in Baltimore. Summer is over. Fall came in with a little bit of a crash. It was 55 degrees where I lived this morning. Anyway, joining us, thank you for joining us, Captain Jan Miles with Pride of Baltimore 2 and Jeff Crosby, Chief Mate, Pride of Baltimore 2, and Coffee with this Saturday morning, the September the 19th.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and welcome. So what have we been up to since our last live stream there, Captain Miles?
Well, you've been doing maintenance, and I've been doing monitoring.
Yeah, plenty of maintenance. So that's been going on. It's nice to have a break from the hot weather. That seems to help things go a lot smoother.
Yeah, so my routine has been to keep track of the drying situation with the ship. We know from 2018 that she just continued to dry and dry and dry, notwithstanding the higher humidity of the summer, and then going into the winter before we went back to preparing for 2019. So this time we're seeing if we can mediate that drying. So twice a week. Our work week is Tuesday through Saturday. So today I'll be wetting down again the deck, wetting down the top sides up forward on the starboard side, particularly because that's the sunny side, even though we have a shade skirt. I'm also monitoring cathodic voltage. We've been having some mysteries as to why it's gotten so high in certain areas. So I've been monitoring that. Those are very small voltages, by the way. So it's
can you explain what that whole process is? Like what is the cathodic system and what exactly are we monitoring?
So wooden vessels that don't have a lot of machinery in them do not need this protection. But when you mix metals and put them in a ship, a wooden boat, the metals argue with each other. One will eat up another. And so it's important to add a sacrificial thing. This is all about contact with the ocean, with the water the boat's sitting in. So propeller, shaft, different metals, conducting across each other through the sea as well as in direct contact. So you establish a sacrificial. A zinc is pretty inexpensive and easy to sacrifice. And that prevents the other two metals or different metals from eating each other up. However, if the voltage gets high enough, it'll actually cook the wood. And so delignification can start to occur. The wood softens, it loses its structural integrity. So we don't want that, we don't like that. And we're having some history with some unacceptable higher voltages, so we've been narrowing things down. We think it's restricted to just sitting here in Baltimore, but it's kind of tough to tell. So anyhow, keeping it low has been what I've been doing, along with monitoring the battery maintenance. Batteries for the house need to be cared for. Being on a trickle charger is fine, but you got to do other stuff over the long run. So I've been monitoring, and assessing whether we're able to even tell if the drying out is being curtailed or not. We just don't know. We won't know until next spring when we say, oh, well, yes, it worked quite a bit or not.
Right. And especially as we take the cover off and start moving around. Yeah. So this morning, we're going to spend some time and tell this story that is related to Pride of Baltimore being dismasted. So Captain Miles, can you kind of start us off with a little bit of context? So where was Pride when this happened? What was she doing? Why were we there? Just kind of, paint the scene, so to speak.
Well, we were participating in a new to Europe race, a regatta. The town of Santander in northern Spain was doing a public relations campaign, and they had commissioned Sail Training International, which are the organizers of of international tall ship races to manage this one race. And they set it up from southern England to Santander, which meant going west through the English Channel around Ile de Ascent, the corner there in France that helps make the difference between so-called Biscay Bay and the English Channel, and then down Biscay Bay to the northern shore of Spain, somewhat east of Cape Finisterre, aka Land's End, to the very early settled Homo sapiens of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago. So there was maybe a dozen vessels participating. One of them was the big Russian square rigger Mir, and she's a sailor. And we also had Jolly Breeze, the channel pilot cutter from a school that's been in the races for decades, is very well managed. And I can't think of the other vessels. So we took off and had a favorable breeze out of the east to southeast. I think it was, no, excuse me, out of the north as we went down the channel. Then we, and it was veering around to the, and we went around the corner and we wound up with going to windward. So it must have been east, northwest, northwest, backing around to southwest. And we were going south. Wind increased for a bit, so we wound up going to windward in an 8-foot sea, no draft topsail because of too much weather helm, a reefed foretopsail, square foretopsail, and 3 headsails because, again, we're dealing with the weather helm. And so wind strength was anywhere from 18 to 24. And the sea was widely spaced, so there was not a lot of cresting going on. So we're making between 6 and 8 knots. Close reaching would be the technical adjustment. We weren't hard on the wind because we couldn't have kept our speed up. And we were keeping up. It was fun. We went around Ile de Ascent doing cross-tacking with the Mir.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we were within yards of each other as we were tacking, all right, trying to figure out what to do. She finally flipped over on a port tack and went straight west, and we decided we could go south. So there was a fair amount of drama back ashore with position fixing. His old prize ahead of the Mir. So, but of course, we'd have to get all the way down to Biscay Bay. Anyway, the next morning after we played tacking duel with the Mir, the next morning we were in this condition where we had taken in the main gaff topsail, reefed the foretopsail, and left the 3 headsails on her. I felt that would give her the power to get through the sea and go on a close reach. Pretty hard trim, but sailing fat to get the speed up, sailing broad, a little bit wide for the trim. And there were clouds building in a scattered way. It was overcast sky. It turned into low-level clouds that were scattered, and there was rain, evident rain, visibly seen. So this one cloud coming by the windward side, somewhat to the distance this afternoon. But that's one afternoon. I happened to be at the helm because I was trying to map our way between and around the clouds. Had dismissed this one cloud because it was some distance away. I wouldn't be able to say I could measure with my eyeballs. I had the sense it was about a mile away, you know, and I wasn't going to the radar real quick to check it out. And so
you haven't developed that superpower of just looking and knowing exactly how far away cloud and weather systems are.
Yeah, right. And I don't recall if it was dropping much water at the time. I had the impression it wasn't dropping much water, so I had sort of dismissed it. So anyway, we get this increase of wind. So we were monitoring wind pretty accurately at the time because we were in an exploration of measuring angle of heel and wind and boat speed and tracking it so that we could study later the business of predicting angle of heel for sail area, for wind force, So anyhow, we had pretty accurate data that came out of that incident, and we wound up with a gust of around 40 knots from the same direction as the wind had been. And the boat was going so fast that as it leaned over, we never took green water. It was just up to the top of the bulwarks at the rail cap. And so I turned the helm up down so that we could come up towards the wind and spill the power. It wasn't threatening. We just didn't want to keep the power. We wanted to go with the with turning up. And then I noticed that she wasn't standing up at all. So I took a look at the wind angle indicator. Again, this is all dry, no rain, no cloud overhead, and saw that the wind angle, the apparent wind angle, had gotten broad, had not narrowed. So it was now towards the beam. So I, again, turned the helm some more to watch the bow swing along the horizon, across the horizon to the right. And there was this vibration and bolting. And I watched all the head rig just go to leeward behind the foremast. And the boat stood up, and I quick wind the helm down, rather up, but to the left to deal with the fact I didn't want her to round up. We already near a change of watch, so a lot of people already dressed, getting ready to do the change of watch. So we had a bunch of people on deck pretty quickly. They got the main down when I was having trouble with the remaining speed to get her to bear away. So they dumped the main really, really rapidly, and without bothering to sheet it in. I mean, it was a sheet. We had eased it out first and then dropped it, so it was over the port rail. But the boat continued to, as it slowed down, continued to turn to the right. And the wind was still almost 90 degrees from what it had been before. So we were, so it just kept drifting around to a stop, and the topsail reef started to go back. But the wind had dropped. Almost moments after the head rig fell away under the strength of the increased wind, and we stood up. In the moments it took to get things down to help try to go to the left and get downwind, the wind had died along with having turned. And so we were now beam to the sea, and topsail back, but very light. The wind probably was down to 10 to 12 knots at this point. And the sea not being so close together, the boat was not doing a heck of a lot of rolling. It was mostly going up and down with a little lurch at the crest and a little lurch at the trough. And we're all sort of gazing ahead, and I'm running through my head, okay, what can we do to shore up the foremast? Because we're only going to be able to go to the bow beak, the cutwater at the top there. And then we start to hear cracking, very sharp firecracker cracking, and become evident that the port and starboard shrouds are going sagging alternately. So
that's good.
That paused everybody. Nobody was doing anything. I stopped thinking about shoring it up.
Yeah, let's just hold on a second.
It wasn't funny at the time, but it's sort of interesting reflecting. So we're all just sort of watching and listening and hearing. Eventually, the foremast falls back. And so people are sort of stepping to the rail if they're not already at the rail. Some people amidships, some people after the main rig. I was all the way aft near the helm, I'd walked to the port side as before the mast fell back, saw that it was coming down port side of the mainmast. So I went to the starboard side, and there was this thud, a dull thud. It wasn't a hard hit on the cabin top. It was a subdued hit, but still a hit. And I looked up, and the main topmast was down, and the lowermast was wobbling. And it was wobbling from the middle. So it was evident to me that the upper half, at least, of the mainmast was going to come down. So as the boat was doing this lurching thing and the doubling was doing this thing, and I'm saying, okay, where is it going to land? And I actually wondered if it was going to land where I was standing, when I realized it wasn't going to land where I was standing, and it went down between me and the wheel and the binnacle. So the distance I might have been between me and the binnacle might have been, I don't know, what's that? Maybe 8 feet, maybe more, 10 feet. The boat's almost 30 feet wide. No, sorry, 24 feet wide back there, maybe. She carries her deck width fairly far aft. So it cleared the wheel, cleared the binnacle, cleared me, went down through the transom, raised transom, and stopped at the covering board, having cracked the covering board. So now there's another silence.
Yeah.
And I immediately switch into a big repeated bellowing roar, saying, all hands muster, midships, muster, midships. And the reason why I was redundant and loud about it was I didn't want anybody adventuring on their own. I wanted to refocus them immediately to a core point so that we could then organize to evaluate. So it took a while for a couple of people to respond because they were to port and had gotten buried under the sails of the foresail when the foremast came back, past the mainmast, going through the main boom, which it still was out. And so nobody was harmed. There wasn't a single individual hurt, bruised, not even knocked. So folks from down below that were not part of the watch change came on deck. So we did a muster. We first sent a couple, 3 people to check for any water ingress down below.
Sure.
Again, the moderation, there was no real power of the wind at all. That we didn't have the steady 18 to 24 that we were seeing before. So except for the squall, we would have seen great moderation had we been able to continue on. So that investigation down below showed that there was nothing going on. So that meant immediately getting into the business of what's going on over the stern because of the mainmast, what's going on near the bow because of the loss of the gear up there. So I looked forward with the second mate, that was Jamie Trost, and determined that we had to right away get the section of bowsprit forward of the gammon lashing, between the gammon lashing and the bowsprit cap, a big piece of timber, probably 14 inches diameter, to get it up out of the water. Didn't have to come aboard, but it had to be out of the water because it was banging up on the port bow. So
Sure.
he and his watch jumped into that business and literally jumped into it because at some point he had to actually go over the side. But again, while the sea was sizable, 6 to 8 feet, it wasn't close, it wasn't cresting. So we were just rising up and down. The headsails and going over the side were in the water, so they acted as a drogue. So we were just laying a hole there.
So fairly comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, except for a jerk at the top and a jerk at the bottom, it was like no big deal. Over the stern, she'd squat though. Every once in a while, she'd be out of alignment, so she would squat, and so the doubling that was over the stern would slam the water and move the inner broken end that was up forward next to the remnant of the mainmast. And the remnant of the mainmast, the mast had broken over a distance, 6 or 8, maybe 10 feet of distance. So it was a bit jagged and splintered, but it was moving because of the squat occurred. So I went back aft to check with the chief mate to see what was going on, and we conferred and directed him to salvage the main gap topsail and just salvage whatever they could. While then I took a few remnant of folks and looked at tying down the inner end in a way that would reduce the amount of movement that was going on. So that was the first series of events that was going on. It took us 6 hours to eventually get everything into one situation whereby we could start the motors with confidence of not having the propellers get fouled.
Right.
and then start our way to somewhere. So in that 6 hours, while folks are doing various things, and I would check in with them, and then I was checking our location. I was checking in with fleet control. There's a little bit of a fun story with that one. I was motivated to not let this be heard like the shot around the world before I talked to the office.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was able to, with the single sideband radio, to get the wire strung up onto the remnant of the mainmast, and I was able to connect with the race control aboard the, I think it was the Mir, and say, okay, we're here. We're going to drop out of the race. We have a rigging problem, so we're going to go to Saint Nazaire. So I figured that out. So do you need any assistance? No, we don't need any assistance. So that was the end of that. The outcome of that didn't work out the way I wanted it to. The ship had a European cell phone. None of the crew had, nor did I. So I was going to use the ship's cell phone once it got into range to communicate directly with folks back at home. I failed completely to recognize that we had 6 guest crew who were a set of Sea Scouts and parents from southern England. And they all had cell phones that were... So they were speaking at home while I was speaking in Baltimore before I even told race control what the real story was so we could coordinate. So the whole thing blew up. So it took us, that didn't happen until the following morning. I mean, we were 100 nautical miles away from Saint Nazaire, so we were motoring along. We had emergency navigation lights, and we had no traffic trouble. It was all spaced out. So after dawn, about dawn, I make this call, which with a 6-hour difference means that I'm calling nearly 2 o'clock in the morning back in the East Coast. And then meanwhile, our guest crew are going, and they're calling race control at STI on the shore side. Hey, did you hear about the Dismasting? And of course, egg on my face, because it would have been courteous to inform them first before anything else happened. At least courteous, responsible. Probably.
Yeah, take your pick of either of those. Yeah.
Right. So, but when we arrived Saint Nazaire in broad daylight, the French press started to hear about this. Mm-hmm. And the boat looked a wreck. I don't know if there are any photos we have available for that.
Yeah, Patrick.
You guys ready for some pictures?
Yeah, you've got some photos lined up there.
Oh.
Do you want to talk about where these photos came from?
Yeah, so this is just a selection of photos from our digital archives that I put together for this morning. I think they were taken by a ton of different crew. We've got TC Sheridan, who I think was on board for the Dismasting. I think Captain Miles, a lot of these photos might be from Captain Miles, and from there on, I think it's just an assortment. So I'm gonna, what's everybody say? I'm gonna share my screen now, everybody. Let's see if we can get it to. Why is it not letting me share the desktop? Technology is just not on my side today.
Yeah, technology doesn't seem to work as well in the mornings, is what I found. It takes a while to wake up, along with all of us.
So while he's hunting for the photographs, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's coming through. Oh, there we go. We're sailing.
Yeah, so this is, I believe, the last known photograph before this masting. I think it was taken maybe 2 days before this masting. That's what the stamp on the picture said, the timestamp. So that, you know, you can see Kelly Poole there at the hatch, and it looks like the main set. But I'll let you take it from here. Cap,
Okay, so
you just wanna
go ahead.
just tell me when you want next.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. So it's gone. Where'd it go? All right, next. So in Saint-Nazaire, there's a lot of great height change in Western Europe. And so there are basins that are created by locks and concrete walls. And so at high water, you fill the basin and then you lock it so that the basin stays full. So this port has a significant World War II history during which the Germans had set up U-boat harbor situation in the basin. So these are the U-boat pins, as they're called, remnants from World War II in Saint-Nazaire. And we're in a basin just across the way from them. Go ahead, Pat. So in the early days of our arrival, you see a lot of debris on deck. So we were still trying to sort ourselves out with regards to the shock of it all and having found a place to get to that was welcoming. So we were continuing to fly colors and courtesy flag. This didn't continue once we got settled into what we were going to do and how we were going to do it and where we were going to do it. Go ahead. So again, like I say, maybe this is day of arrival. It took us 5 days or more to begin to have things cleaned up. Figuring out where to do that in the basin was a trick too. So one of the things that was very wonderful was out of the blue comes this American voice saying hello, and it turns out to be Mike Newmeyer, who has a legacy with the Apprentice Shop up in Maine, and Lance Lee, who's married to a French gal and growing a family in France, and he doesn't live very far away. And he gets word, he comes down and offers his services as a translator and a resource. He's a boat carpenter. He's running a boat carpenter shop there, associated with youth, with adults at risk, trying to help with job training and stuff. So Mike became an absolutely important connection to the local resources that are aligned with traditional wood vessels. What an asset he turned out to be. So anyhow, we had to find a place to go and unload this stuff. So here's just pictures of the stuff.
Yeah, that looks like a lot of spaghetti deck.
So it's hard to fathom when the vessel is totally rigged that we probably have nearly 10 tons of stuff above the deck. Maybe it's 8. But you've got the big dimension lower masts, you've got the topmasts, you've got the yards. Just in the rigging and the spars, we're probably talking 8 tons of stuff. And it's all vertical, so you're not conscious of how much volume is involved, how much space is involved. That's the mass of it all. Well, now you are.
Yeah, man, that's...
See how they, okay, this shot's interesting. The wheel, the mainmast is the spar coming down to the right, lower right of the picture.
Yeah.
The left
That's
side,
pretty close.
on the port side, you'll see the mast cap for the foremast. So that when the foremast swung back, it swung down between the mainmast shrouds on the port side and the mast itself. And when it came down, it more or less missed the chasseur. It was inboard of the chasseur. So when it came down, the fact that the rigging was slack still helped the mast keep from going over the side. And so it just came down cantilevered in a sense. And in the case of the mainmast, we weren't rolling so much that there was anything to do but come down somewhere aboard. Whether it would be in the center or to one side or the other was a matter timing. So we had very fortunate timing under the unfortunate circumstances.
Yeah. Looks like it.
That's the aft face of the aft cabin. That's the aft hatch there near the binnacle. So this is slightly to port. This is the mast cap of the lowermost with the boom to port. So it's the topmast on the top of the picture. It's the main boom to port. And a bit of the main gaff, I'm thinking, is down here in the lower part, and sail. And all the associated stuff.
Yeah.
So it took us 6 hours to, as I said before we could feel confident about starting engines. And so the back end of the boat, there were certain things we just couldn't do because of weight. And but if we swept the head rigging in the aft along the port side and then kept dragging the sails aboard and just dumping it on deck, and then sweep whatever we couldn't lift up around to the quarter or even around to the stern. And of course, we weren't going to do anything with the main mast, and we've been able to get the main gaff topsail in. So anything that was easy to bring in, we did, but otherwise the rest of it stayed there. And so at the end of the mainmast, you see the tip of the broken main gaff topmast sticking out of the cap. And so we wound up being like a fishing boat, just dragging or shrimper, just dragging this stuff along with us as we went ahead under power.
Yeah, and that mainmast just went right through that transom.
Well, like I said, it's a big spar.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a 19-inch diameter spar with a square top to it. The foremast is a 21-inch diameter spar. So and these are grown trees. Everything was grown at that time, except the main topmast and the jaboom. Everything was grown.
And the main topmast and jaboom were laminated?
Well, the main topmast, the original one we discovered had a locus of knots. And during an unfortunate grab of the main cap shroud on a fender on a dock in Puerto Rico, I wasn't on board, but in backing up, they got close to one of those huge tires in a commercial pier and a very high wall, and the cap shroud got snagged, and it snapped the main topmast back in early 90, and so that was laminated. A new one was laminated up, and then to replace that, it was a quick repair. And then after we got home, the boat got home, it was repaired, replaced, and that was a laminated replacement. We also later on that same return trip, again I wasn't on board. There was a big sea off of the Bahamas on the return trip in this late winter, early spring, and so the whisker shroud on the port side fell out of the whisker pole. And when that happened, and they pierced the sea, and then the lift of the ship, this jaboom did its sort of fishing pole bend, but went so far as to split open the grain, which is a twisted grain, along the checks that it had.
Yeah.
So we wound up having to replace that later on. So in this case, the jaboom was laminated, and the main top was laminated. The topsail yard arms had laminated ends for reinforcement, but otherwise everything was grown.
Okay.
So it took us 5 days to reach an ability to actually see where the failure occurred.
Sure.
And so this is the sort of in situ scene of it. That's the, in the foreground is the outer bobstay iron, and back in the background, you can see the inner bobstay iron.
Patrick, do you have a photo of kind of just Pride where you could kind of point out where those irons are on the rig?
Not readily available. Let me, one sec. Let me see if I.
Yeah. Well, Patrick,
any kind of profile shot, Patrick. It doesn't even have to be a photo. It could be a drawing.
Yeah. And Captain Miles, you want to, while Patrick's looking for that, kind of tell us what you guys found out about the failure, the cause of the failure?
So, okay, whoops. All right, down in the lower left corner of this photo, whoops. Oh, he's blowing it up, okay. There are bobstays of these cables that are running from the waterline of the bow up to the outer end underneath the bow sprit. The black spar is the bow sprit. The varnish spar is the gibbet boom. And then hanging off the cap of the bow sprit vertically down is the martingale spreader, popularly speaking, the dolphin striker. So underneath the outer end of the bow sprit, these two cables coming up from the waterline of the bow stem are lanyard arrangements for tensioning. And then you have the dead eyes right up close to the bowsprit. These are these dark spots right close to the bowsprit, up at the other end, opposite end of the lanyards, which are the sort of gray distance between two blotches are these ropes that go through dead eyes that you can use like a block and pulley system and tension everything. So the forward iron failed. The inner iron did not fail, but it got stretched a little bit. And the sprit, as a result, bent enough that it could not bend any further considering its dimension. So this is a 15 odd inch thickness sprit, and it just couldn't take the bend, so it snapped. And it snapped at the gammon lashing, which is this brown spot further towards the stem. There you go. That's the gammon lashing. So it snapped abruptly right there. And so all three head soles came away. And the vessel was then in a situation where it had a lot of weather helm and was going to round up.
Mm-hmm. What caused it to snap?
Well, considering the boat was about 17 years old at the time and had voyaged a great deal. So the surprise of this, I think, can be associated with more aggressive sailing to one degree. So how often do we sail with all three head soles going to windward in pretty stout conditions? Even when we're shortening down, we have a tendency traditionally, and for reasons of the stretchy rig, even as tight as we keep it, to drop the jib top. So imagine a bow and arrow situation. You've got a sail hanging on the string, so to speak, and you're pulling the string, so the sail is pulling the wire to the side. Even though you're going to windward, you've got the sail trimmed in, you're still yanking the stay to the side. Well, that's going to be pulling up on whatever is at the bottom of the stay and forward with whatever's at the top of the stay. So in the case of all three head soles being forward of the stem, the bobstays are important for holding the bowsprit in place. And if it's only one sail, we've never had a problem with that. Now, the jibboom goes further out and has a so-called martingale arrangement, which is using backstays or back ropes that come back from the dolphin striker, the martingale spreader, attached to the hull, coming forward to the end of the martingale spreader, and then a single one going up to the outer end of the jibboom, the forward end of the jibboom, keeping that extension down so that you can set the jib, and also the jib topsail, or sometimes modern terminology, flying jib. So all three of these headsail, well, if you're using just two, you've got one stay pulling on the bowsprit, you've got another stay pulling on the jibboom, which is transferring through the martingale system back to the bowsprit, back to the bobstays. So those sails are pulling the wires to the side, so they're trying to pull the head rig up while they're also trying to pull the foremast and the foremast forward. Now, when you set the jib topsail, you add more lift to the jibboom because it's pulling the wire to the side, trying to shorten the distance through the windage of the sail capturing the wind, and you're now pulling forward on the fore topmast above the lowermast. So there's a lot of staying for the lowermast and the topmast that doesn't equate the same way with the head rig. The head rig just doesn't have that much staying. So for 17 years, we've apparently never been in a situation where we've had 40 knots of wind and 3 headsails set at the same time.
Right.
So we discovered abruptly, that that attachment between the bobstays and the bowsprit was inadequate. So you got a squall that's 40 knots. You got a boat leaning over with the sail area that was set under those circumstances. It was only leaning over 35 degrees. And there was no green water on deck. So there was, except for this failure, there was no safety concern. So with this discovery, there was a fair amount of study on what the iron should be. And so that new iron is, it was a computer study, what they call a finite element computer study. And so the replacement irons are huge and more than adequate for those kinds of sailing circumstances, which someone could say they would never have done it that way back in the day. Well, okay.
Sure. They wouldn't have done a lot of these things back in the day, but here we are. So while you guys were in France, what was it like putting the boat back together, not being back home?
Well, let me first say, we didn't know what we were going to do for upwards of 2 months.
Okay.
So, first of all, we're arranging just where can we stay while we figure things out. And so, traditional mariners, sailing mariners in France locally, were very accommodating, very helpful with introducing to the authorities, because you had to get all that clearance done. You had to establish where it was okay to leave the boat and who with, and what was it going to cost, and then in order to investigate the incident, we had to arrange it in such a way that we could do it so that the Coast Guard could come look, because that was in their purview. And then of course notifying insurance. So day by day by day, there was this constant puzzle of what have we answered, what haven't we answered. And so the first stage of it was all about getting a place so that we can unpack the ship, so to speak, which involved getting a crane as well to get things out. And that also provided time for the insurance surveyor to come and take a look. He spent 3 days with us aboard. And so, meanwhile, we're trying to figure out, once we got an idea what the budget might be, or even before that, we started wondering, okay, what do we do? Bring the boat home? How do we do that? Put a bunch of fuel on board? Okay, maybe. That's going to be an awful trip. Maybe not, maybe so. Do we find a place locally? Do we ship it? We even checked out putting it on a ship and shipping it. Those numbers are huge. The cost of that is huge.
I can only imagine.
So now with our relationship with Sail Training International, they immediately came back to us and said, look, we know a lot of people. Well, yeah. So give us the parameters of what you're looking for, and maybe we can get others to offer up solutions. So we had a lot of online information that we could share seeking bids for replacing the spars that were broken. And so there was, in the end, there were 9 proposals to replace spars, all from Europe, England, Norway, Holland, and France. And so with that response, it gave us reason to not think about shipping the boat or taking the boat back home again. And then start figuring out, it looks like we're going to do the Norwegian proposal, do we actually go there? What's that going to involve? If we're going to take the English one or the Dutch one or where in France? There was a proposal out of the Mediterranean side of France. There was a proposal out of the Ussant area near the point there, Brest, near the town of Brest. So there was a lot of chunking of this human computer going around and around and around and around. And between Mike Newmayer introducing us, now we decided to engage the expertise of a naval architect local, who happens to be, through Mike Newmayer, we learned, the most esteemed French traditional naval architect. His training is in commercial work, and he spent a lot of time, but as he moved towards retirement, he got into his own. Francois Vivier, you can look him up on the internet. What a sweet designer of smaller boats, traditional boats. But anyway, he only lived 20 minutes away, so we engaged him, and he helped us with our communications back and home in terms of Peter Bedreau, the builder of the boat, who is now then engaged with Andy Davis and the Tri-Coastal folks. So they had the computer power to do the finite element design research and to consult, to answer my consultations with regards to things about replacing the spars. So as it turned out, we wound up choosing a lamination group, French company, Gattier, that was had 2 factories, one of which is only 100 kilometers away. And also through Mike Newmayer, we were able to find and commission 2 different French carpentry groups. One was this individual, Philippe Simon. What a genius he was. He was the fellow who wound up doing a lot of the close order conversion of hardware from old spars to the new spars. And then there was another group that did the transom repair, separate to that. And so this all was unfolding. It wasn't until near Thanksgiving we signed a contract with Gattier. So we were already there 2 months. And so we got into ship repair that was ancillary or either collateral or totally unrelated to the effect of the dismasting.
Sure.
So we kept a full crew. We stayed aboard, and that meant that, yes, going to your question, what was it like? Well, the Western French folks do not have anywhere near as much English as the Parisian folks do.
Sure.
So we were a great friendship, great politeness, great willingness to converse, but we were sort of helpless in some respects. but we also learned very quickly courtesies. You walk into a store, and no matter how many people are in it, you always say hello. You always say, because you're going to get told hello by the proprietor.
Sure.
So that was, I don't know, my Western existence was, leave well enough alone. Why bother people? Because they're busy doing stuff, right? But no. Even when there's a bunch of people in the store, you always say, bonjour, ça va? So that was, once you got used to that, that was just a tremendous way of sort of getting a little closer to the way their lives are lived and how you would adapt to that. Of course, the French pastries. Oh boy.
Yeah, that's dangerous. Yeah.
The evening time for the drinkers was always great fun. Not being a drinker myself, I didn't imbibe. We were invited to various things because of the length of time we were there. There was some time off. We went to a 5-day work week, so the weekends were whole.
Sure.
And so, those who had the desire and the willingness and the ability would go, maybe walking, hiking, take the train. The train's not expensive. Not that Western Europe isn't expensive. It's just that in the scale of things, the train was a great way to get around if you wanted to get away from town. The architecture of Saint-Nazaire has been badly damaged due to World War II, so you had to get a little bit around to discover some of the more original, undamaged architecture. But everybody was so fascinated with this tragedy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. How long did you guys end up staying in France? How long did the whole process of deciding what to do, tracking down a builder of the mast, re-rigging, how long did that take?
6 months. So,
okay.
I'm suddenly blanking with the date we departed Saint-Nazaire. But we were totally whole when we departed. There was no leftover stuff to do. See, one of the things we didn't do was do any improvement. When it came to the detail of the rig, I contemplated it, but I realized right away that our timeline factor was going to get in the way. So what we did, we spent a lot of time, once we knew we were going to stay in the area and work with Gautier, we spent a lot of time confirming the differences between as drawn versus as built when it came to the dimensions of the spars and the locations of all the improvements that have been made in the 17 years thus far. So, and we were able to get a lot of coordination out of Peter Bedreau and Tricoastal in digitalizing the conversion between as drawn, because it was never a drawn rig, never a digitalized rig, to a digital information on the spars. And because the builders of the spars, this lamination group, could promise as much finishing that they did based on their tools and equipment, they would have tolerance controls of less than 2 millimeters. So we had every opportunity to get rid of the scale of the drawing and go right to digital. So we took that time before the actual effort to start construction was going to be made. They had to find the wood. Part of our ask was we wanted to build out a Douglas fir, and we knew it was shipped to Western France. The question is could they find the volume? And when I say Douglas fir ship, we're talking 2x4 dimensions, stock stuff that's just milled. So they were able to say they'd located enough, so it would be good and dry. And it was next to no knots, because that's the quality that is shipped out from North America. There's a minimum quality that gets shipped out. So almost completely knot free. When they started construction, which was right after Christmas, after the New Year, I guess, they promised 1 spar a week So we had, I think, 11 deliveries. And,
Wow.
they started with the big stuff, as I recall. And so Resorcinol glue construction. So this company doesn't do masts. This company does structural members for buildings out of wood.
Sure. Yeah.
They've been involved. The company at the time was 55 years old and had two companies, one over towards Paris and this one just 100 kilometers away from Saint-Nazaire to the north of Saint-Nazaire. So what they do is, I don't know if I have a picture of some of the other stuff they did, but what they do is they take milled lumber of any dimension, they smooth it, make sure it's dry. They have their own kiln drying scene. They then, through jigs and other arrangements, they end-to-end finger scarf lengths to create 2x4, in our case, 2x4 lengths that were the length of any spar, and get enough of them to lay alongside each other to make diameter, and then make enough of those slabs of 4-inch thick slabs for length to stack up to get the other diameter to begin to make a square. And then once this all the curing has been done with the Resorcinol glue, which comes in stages, because you assemble the lengths, slap them side by each, make a slab, let it dry. A lot of clamping. You got to clamp every 6 inches to 8 inches.
Yeah.
Because even though they smooth plane everything, the principle of Resorcinol is not so much as an adhesive like epoxy. It's not the same degree of adhesive that epoxy has. So the principle, a large principal factor with Resorcinol is making sure all the surfaces are virtually parallel with each other.
Right.
When you get tightly clamped, so there's not a lot of glue there because it doesn't have a lot of inherent structure. But by virtue of being a very thin seam, a very uniform seam, it's sort of like water between two plates of glass. You can't pull them apart. You can slide them apart, but you can't pull them apart. So working with milled lumber to make huge structures actually works, because the more seams you have, the stronger the structure is when you're making a big structure like that. And Resorcinol works very, very well. It's been around a long time. So it's a heated scenario. You have to have a heated shop. In their case, they're doing so much volume that they have a whole system for it. And then you take these slabs, and they did something interesting. They took the 4-inch slabs and cut them into thirds flats. Full diameter, full width, but just third thickness. And then they stacked everything up. And it was a bit of a puzzle trying to figure out why they did that. My understanding is they did it because if you hadn't done that, you took 4-inch slabs, stacked them together to make the square, you'd have an X and Y difference between the spacings of the longitudinal seams. So every 2 inches versus every 4 inches. By thinning down the 4-inch slabs into thirds, you more equalize the spacing of the principal X and Y axes glue lines. And that means the bending resistance is more or less equal when oriented on the X and on the Y. They also were indiscriminate about how they stacked all these thinner slabs. They weren't trying to align their principal glue seam because the National Institute of Wood for France had determined that a glue line that might fail or is failing cannot force another glue line to fail. So with a Resorcinol, the more seams, the better. Now with epoxies, because it has real stickiness to it, real adhesiveness to it, that's a different, it requires less, it can sustain strength without so many seams. So not that you wouldn't have strength by a lot of seams, it's just that it isn't as, the logistics of the two glues, one has minimum requirements, the other one has somewhat more forgiving minimum requirements, depending upon the small shop. In mass production like this, they do this all over the place. You can imagine gymnasiums, outdoor walking bridges, all this lamination. It's all with Resorcinol. It's in a heated shop, and it uses just standard milled lumber. You don't have to use 2x4. You can use other dimension, but you do want to smooth it. You do want to clamp the heck out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then this factory could 8 sides straight, could square straight, and could turn either straight or tapered. So we were able to get everything turned where it needed turning, could get everything that was to be 8-sided or squared cut to within 2 millimeters. And if it had to be a tapered cut, they could get the straight of it done, and then our carpenter, Philippe Simon, would do the taper when it was required. So a lot of those spars, when they were delivered, were very, very highly finished.
Yeah, I mean, being able to turn them creates that, imperfection-free spar rather than doing it in a parking lot with traditional tools and a hand planer. So, yeah. Wow.
Here they are.
That's delivery of the new spars coming?
That's one.
And you got them one at a time?
Yeah, so what's interesting is we got across the way on our side of the basin, opposite the sub pens, there was a covered area that was unused. I can't remember the history of it. It had to be manufacturing that was abandoned, but because it was unused, it was unclosed. It was open air in the sense that it was just roofed over. So a lot of birds roosting there, but we were able to get the loan of it from the town. And so we worked in there when it came to the transfer and the coatings and all the finish transfer of hardware. So we didn't have to work outdoors to keep the spars ongoing. Now we're setting in the bowsprit of the new one. There's the main mast going in.
I love the tent you guys built.
Yeah, that was to help with a variety of things. We moved it around the deck a little bit to help with caulking. We were doing some general maintenance caulking that had nothing to do with the dismasting, but we also had some caulking we had to do around the mast because of stresses that related to the dismasting. So the end result of this type of manufacturing is that the spars are stiffer. We see that readily if you compare photographs of the square topsole pre-lamination and post-lamination. And we put a lot of tension on the halyard hoisting the square fore topsole yard up, stretching the reaches of the square topsole, fore topsole. And there's a lot of smiling going on with the grown spar and a whole lot less smiling going on with the course yard, laminated course yard. So a lot of stiffness. As a result, we've not seen any change around the mast partners on deck. You just don't see any consequence of a stiffer mast. So now the trees do not bend a lot, but the fact that they probably could bend more than the laminated spars. We're not seeing any stresses at the deck.
Awesome. Well, what an incredible story that is. Being able to get the entire rig back on deck, coming into France, being able to rebuild the whole rig with a company that was relatively close. I mean, that's just downright incredible.
Well, let's make a comparison now that you brought it up. So you're making a plan. You don't have a squall. You don't have a dismasting. You're making a plan. You couldn't have start the process of the plan and the execution and get it all done in 6 months. Your planning would probably be a year in advance.
Yeah.
So I think there's something wonderfully a wonderful story of just how everything came together the way it came together. The resources, the coordination, the volunteerism, the enthusiasm. I mean, there's a community of spirit that goes with these traditional vessels, as we know. The tall ship phrase is supplanted what is sail training and traditional sailing Poor John Masefield, the poet who created the poetry Sea Fever. All I want is a tall ship to start to steer by. So it's, you know, none of the big square riggers are taller than they are long. So set that aside. The community is really strong, really supportive. Pride's reputation doesn't mean that this report would have been different for a vessel less well known. A little bit, but certainly the French have really enjoyed the Baltimore Clippers story. They own some of it, they claim. I'm not going to argue the point.
Sure.
Chesapeake Bay just took whatever the ideas were and just went extreme. That's all they did. The ideas existed before, just went a lot very extreme. So what a wonderful story of like-minded folks coming together, helping strangers to a land they're not familiar with. You know, history is replete with these kinds of events. There's a wonderful story. I can't speak of the details, but it's fascinating. One of those big square riggers, the P-line boats that was doing nitrate between Chile and Europe, like the, I've forgotten some of the names, but the one that Irving Johnson was on, the Peking. So one of those vessels had a bit of a spar failure, a significant one. I can't remember what spar failed. It might have been a yard, but those boats are so big, they're all made of metal. He winds up in Chile. There's no resources there, but he works his crew and he works locally and he gets it all sorted out and he sails the boat back because it got fixed. There's other stories. You wind up in trouble around the Horn. You wind up in the Falkland Islands. There's nothing going on over there. So there's some really interesting figure it out sorts. And we had so much help out of our contacts in France and around Western Europe, Sail Trading International. So yeah, it was quite, you couldn't have planned a 6-month turnaround snap like that. Okay, we're going to change the mast. We're going to do it right now. We're going to be done in 6 months. You couldn't have done it.
Yeah, especially with the improvement of, you know, laminated masts and spars that were turned, and, you know, like there's just so many of those details that just really lined up. That's really neat. Well, that's going to do us for today's episode. Hopefully you guys will join us next Saturday at 9 for another installment of Coffee with Captain. Thank you, Patrick, for taking us through the photo archives and giving us a visual for these stories that kind of really helps explain what we're all talking about. And Captain Miles, do you have any parting words for us?
Well, we're going to be using 3 headsels at the same time on a regular basis. And please, everybody, stay diligent.
All right. Bye, everyone.